This footage was recovered from 3 drives. The original files were destroyed. What you are about to see may be the last documentary I will ever make. The screen glitches, a cascade of corrupted pixels bleeding across red rock formations, a desert skyline rendered in broken timestamps and digital decay. The audio warps, a low distortion beneath a voice that tries to remain clinical, detached, professional. But there's a strain in it, a fracture. Sedona vortexes flicker into frame, crystal shops, shadowy figures gathered near ancient rock formations, their movements jerky, their faces obscured by compression artifacts. The storm overhead pulses with unnatural rhythm. The sky doesn't look right. Nothing looks right. And then the title appears, fragmented and barely readable. Sedona, The Grid Beneath. A film by Maya Rhodes. The screen cuts to black. 6 weeks earlier, Los Angeles, before the film was finished, before the transmission, before everything changed. Maya Rhodes sat in her cramped apartment, illuminated only by the glow of 3 editing monitors arranged in a horseshoe around her desk. Empty coffee cups lined the edges of her workspace like offerings to focus. Printouts of conspiracy forums, annotated in red pen, circled, crossed out, mocked, were taped to the walls. She was good at this, dissecting fraud, exposing grift, making a living out of other people's desperation. On her center screen, a self-proclaimed psychic stumbled through a cold reading, fishing for details from a grieving widow. Maya snorted, paused the footage, and made a note. Ask about prior research. Check social media cross-reference. She had made a career out of debunking psychics who couldn't predict their own irrelevance, UFO cults led by men with criminal records, wellness gurus selling expensive placebos to the sick and afraid. She believed the truth was simple. People lie for money, and people believe because they're terrified of chaos. The world was random. Meaning was a product you could sell. Her phone buzzed, a video call. She clicked accept. The face of a network producer appeared, tired, skeptical, but interested. Maya leaned back and launched into her pitch with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this a dozen times before. Sedona is a gold mine, she said, pulling up reference photos on a second screen. Vortex tours, energy healers, shops selling crystals advertised as Atlantean technology. Spiritual tourism at its most exploitative. UFO sightings that conveniently cluster around paid excursions. It's fraud dressed up as enlightenment, and people are spending thousands. The producer nodded. And you can deliver the goods? Interviews, contradictions, the full breakdown? I always do. She had no idea she was about to become the subject of her own investigation. 3 days later, Maya drove into Sedona in a rented SUV loaded with camera gear, tripods, and a decade of professional doubt. The red rock formations rose around her like cathedral walls, impossibly vast, ancient, and indifferent. Tourist-heavy streets unfolded in a parade of kitsch. Crystal shops with names like Cosmic Awakening, Vortex Experience signs promising transformation for $39, groups of visitors sitting cross-legged on hillsides, eyes closed, hands raised to the sky. She rolled her eyes. She parked near the main strip, checked her equipment, and began her work. The first interviews were exactly what she expected. A tour guide in linen pants and Birkenstocks described the electromagnetic energy fields with the conviction of someone who had memorized a script. A shopkeeper sold her a so-called Atlantean crystal grid, aligned to your chakra frequency, and couldn't explain what that meant when pressed. A man claiming to be a UFO contactee recounted vague lights in the sky, dates that didn't match, details that shifted under questioning. Maya's questions were polite, patient, surgical. She let them talk. She let them reveal themselves. That was the method. Ask the right questions, stay neutral, and the fraud exposes itself. But then the anomalies began. During a shoot near one of the famous vortex sites, a clearing surrounded by twisted juniper trees and red stone pillars. Her camera desynced. The audio track recorded a low hum that hadn't been audible in real time, a resonance that seemed to come from beneath the ground. She checked the cables, checked the settings. Electromagnetic interference, she told herself. The rock formations were rich in iron oxide. It was explainable. She kept filming. Late afternoon on her 5th day, she hiked alone to a remote overlook to capture golden hour B-roll, the kind of footage that made documentaries feel cinematic. Long shadows, warm light, the vastness of the desert stretched out to the horizon. She set up her tripod, framed the shot, pressed record. The landscape was silent. Not peaceful, silent. No birds, no wind, just the hum of her camera and the faint buzz of her own breath. She went to the overlook for a shot. She left with a transmission. It appeared without sound. A craft, geometric, seamless, impossibly still, hovering in the distance against the setting sun. No visible propulsion, no heat distortion, no movement that suggested anything mechanical. It simply was, suspended in the air like a flaw in reality. Maya froze, her hands tightened on the tripod, her breath caught. The camera kept recording. Time seemed to slow, or perhaps her perception of it bent, stretched, distorted. She couldn't look away, she couldn't move. And then the voice arrived. Not a voice, a flood. She dropped to her knees, hands pressed to her temples, gasping. The camera, still recording on the tripod, captured her collapse in perfect clinical detail. But what it couldn't capture was the torrent of images that slammed into her mind with the force of a breaking dam. Crystalline chambers stretching beneath the earth, vast and glowing. Towering figures, humanoid but wrong, too tall, their faces angular and cold, standing before a lattice of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. A map of the desert, overlaid with grids and nodes, pathways of energy threading through the rock. And deeper still, a city, submerged, radiant, alive with a light that felt ancient and impossibly aware. The voice, if it could be called that, did not speak in words. It spoke in certainty, in memory, in knowledge that bypassed language entirely and carved itself directly into her consciousness. I am Karu. You have been chosen to remember what was buried. Maya gasped, her vision swimming, her body trembling. The craft was gone. The sun had dipped below the horizon. Her camera was still recording, the red light blinking steadily in the twilight. She didn't remember standing. She didn't remember packing her gear. But when she looked down at her hands, they were shaking, and somewhere deep in her mind, beneath the layers of professionalism and skepticism and practiced detachment, a single thought surfaced, cold and undeniable. What if I've been wrong about everything? She woke at the overlook in the dusk. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, purple and red, bleeding into one another, the light dying slowly. Her body was curled on the ground, knees pulled in, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. The camera was still recording. The red light blinked steadily, clinical and indifferent. Maya sat up, gasping. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth tasted like copper. The air felt too thin, or maybe her lungs had forgotten how to pull it in properly. She looked around, disoriented, terrified. The craft was gone. The sky was empty. Only the wind remained, moving through the juniper trees with a sound like whispered warnings. She told herself it was heat stroke, dehydration, a hallucination brought on by altitude and exhaustion. The desert could do that to people. She'd read the reports. Tourists collapsing, seeing things, their brains starving for oxygen and logic unraveling in the heat. That's all this was. A medical episode. Not a transmission, not contact, not real. She stood, her legs unsteady, and reached for the camera. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. She stopped the recording and immediately played it back, her breath shallow, her pulse hammering in her ears. The footage captured everything. The craft, hovering in perfect geometric stillness, her collapse sudden and total. and the audio distorted, layered with harmonic tones that sounded like music and machinery at once. Frequencies that shouldn't exist together but did, impossibly, threading through the recording like a signal buried in static. Maya replayed it 3 times, then 4, then stopped counting. Back in her motel room, she obsessively reviewed the footage frame by frame. She zoomed in on the craft, measuring its dimensions, analyzing the light refraction, searching for seams, wires, anything that would betray a hoax. She searched online for explanations: military drones, atmospheric lensing, plasma phenomena, mass hysteria, experimental aircraft from nearby bases. She took notes in a spiral notebook, building a rational counter-narrative with the precision of someone constructing a defense against their own sanity. She was a skeptic. Skeptics do not have visions. They do not receive transmissions from beings that speak in layered certainty and ancient memory. They explain. They debunk. They remain in control. But the images wouldn't stop. Even when she closed her eyes, they were there. A crystalline city submerged beneath an ocean that no longer existed, its towers glowing with a light that felt alive. Anunnaki figures, tall, angular, their faces carved from cold geometry, standing before a massive lattice of light, their hands moving in precise patterns as they calibrated something vast and incomprehensible. Human Atlantean hybrids, their features blended, sitting in meditative communion with the grid, their minds linked, their consciousness flowing through the structure like electricity through wire. The images felt like recovered memory, not imagination, like something she had seen before, like something she had always known but forgotten. Karu's voice echoed in fragments, threading through her thoughts with a clarity that made her want to scream. Atlantis was not destroyed. It was deactivated, a failsafe, to prevent weaponization. The grid sleeps beneath your world, waiting for reactivation. She grabbed her notebook and wrote it down, word for word, as if documenting it would contain it, make it something external, something she could study and dissect. But the writing only made it more real. Maya didn't sleep that night. She paced, she reviewed footage, she built spreadsheets, she cross-referenced geological surveys, historical records, indigenous oral traditions. She was searching for anything that would either confirm or destroy what she had experienced. Either outcome would be acceptable. Ambiguity was not. By morning, she made a decision. She would seek out corroboration. She would interview people who might have pieces of the puzzle. See if the vision aligned with anything verifiable. If it did, that was data. If it didn't, she could dismiss it as a neurological event and move on. She found the Hopi elder through a contact list she'd compiled during her initial research. A man named Thomas Yazzie, mentioned in a blog post about indigenous perspectives on Sedona's so-called sacred sites. She called him. He agreed to meet. His home was modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood outside the tourist corridor. The walls were lined with petroglyphs, replicas and sketches, and artifacts, pottery, woven baskets, stones carved with symbols she didn't recognize. He was older, his face lined with decades of sun and patience. He gestured for her to sit. Maya set up her camera out of habit, then hesitated. "Do you mind if I record this?" "Record what you need," he said calmly. "The truth doesn't change whether it's captured or not." She pressed record. "I'm investigating stories about the vortexes," she began, her voice controlled, professional, "and anomalies, unusual experiences people have had. I wanted to ask if you've heard similar accounts." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring something. Then he spoke. "The grid has always been here. The old ones knew. They built the markers, petroglyphs, cairns, ceremonial sites, all aligned to the nodes beneath the earth. The energy was not meant to be disturbed, but people keep digging, keep probing, and now it's waking up." Maya felt her skin go cold. "You're not the first to be called," he continued. Others have come here with the same look in their eyes, the same fear. They see things they can't explain, and they come looking for permission to believe. I don't. Maya started, then stopped. Her throat felt tight. I don't believe in this. I'm a skeptic. I debunk. You debunk fraud, Thomas said gently. But what you saw wasn't fraud, was it? She didn't answer. He leaned forward. The beings you encountered, tall, angular, older than memory, they are the architects, the ones who built the grid with the ancestors of Atlantis before the flood. They left the system dormant, buried beneath stone and silence to prevent misuse. But the system is not dead. It's waiting. Maya's hands were shaking again. She gripped the edge of the chair to steady them. How do you know what I saw? I didn't tell you. You didn't have to. The elder's story matched details from the vision she had never shared. The architecture, the figures, the purpose. She felt the walls of her rationality begin to crack, hairline fractures spreading through the foundation she had spent a decade building. She left his home in silence, her camera heavy in her bag, her mind racing. The next interview was with a geologist named Dr. Laura Chen, a researcher affiliated with a university survey project studying magnetic anomalies in the Sedona Basin. Maya had found her name buried in a footnote of a suppressed study, one that had been uploaded to a university server and then quietly removed. They met at a coffee shop. Dr. Chen was young, sharp, visibly uncomfortable. She ordered tea she didn't drink and kept glancing at the door. I can't go on record, she said immediately. Then don't, Maya replied. Just tell me what you found. Dr. Chen hesitated, then pulled out a tablet. She showed Maya a series of graphs, low-frequency vibrations detected at multiple vortex sites, magnetic field distortions that didn't correspond to known geological formations, resonance patterns that suggested artificial structures beneath the surface. There's something down there, she said quietly. We mapped it. Chambers, corridors, a network. But when we submitted the data for publication, we were told to retract it. Funding was pulled. The project was shut down. We're not allowed to publish the data. Maya stared at the graphs. Who stopped you? I don't know. It came from above, way above. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Chen looked at her, and for a moment there was something raw in her expression. Because if something's down there, people deserve to know. And because I think you already know. Maya left the coffee shop with a flash drive of unpublished data and a deepening sense of dread. The evidence was accumulating, and someone was already monitoring it. She noticed the black SUV 2 days later. It was parked outside her motel when she left in the morning, and again when she returned at dusk. A man in sunglasses sat in the driver's seat watching. She tested it, drove to a gas station, circled back. The SUV followed at a distance, professional and deliberate. Her phone began to glitch. Calls dropped mid-conversation. Texts failed to send. Apps crashed. She opened her laptop to find files corrupted, timestamps altered, metadata scrambled. She wasn't paranoid. She was being followed. That night, Maya sat alone in her motel room, surrounded by footage, notes, and the elder's cryptic warnings. The walls felt too close. The air felt too thin. She opened her laptop and stared at the project files, dozens of hours of interviews, B-roll, debunking material. And then she made a choice. She opened a new project file, titled it, The Grid Beneath, Real Story. She began to log the visions as data. The crystalline city, the Anunnaki architects, the lattice of light, Karu's transmission, the elder's corroboration, Dr. Chen's suppressed research. She wrote it all down with the methodical precision of someone documenting evidence, but also with the growing awareness that she was documenting her own unraveling. She couldn't ignore it anymore. If this was real, It was the most important story she would ever tell. If it wasn't, she needed to document the process, how a rational mind fractures, how belief colonizes skepticism, how the self can be lost. Either way, the story had to be told. By dawn, she had made her final decision. Maya packed her gear, cameras, batteries, hard drives, notebooks. She pulled up a map of the vortex sites mentioned in her visions and cross-referenced them with Dr. Chen's data and the Elder's markers. She plotted a route into the desert, far from the tourist trails, toward the places where the grid pulsed closest to the surface. She sat in her rented SUV, engine running, and filmed herself in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, determined, exhausted. "If I'm wrong," she said to the camera, her voice steady, "I'll debunk myself. I'll document the whole process and release it as a case study in how even skeptics can fall. But if I'm right, this changes everything." She turned off the camera, put the car in drive, and headed toward the coordinates. She crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. Maya's motel room transformed over the course of 3 days. What had been a generic space with beige walls and functional furniture became something else entirely. An investigation hub, a war room, a mind externalized and pinned to plaster. Maps covered every available surface, geological surveys printed from university archives, topographical charts marked with red circles, satellite images of the desert with overlays showing magnetic field distortions. She pinned photographs to the walls, vortex sites, petroglyphs etched into canyon stone, the locations from her visions rendered as GPS coordinates. Red string connected them all, crisscrossing the room in a web of evidence and inference. She set up her camera on a tripod and filmed herself explaining the emerging pattern, her voice steady but her eyes burning with the kind of intensity that comes from too much coffee and too little sleep. "This isn't random," she said, gesturing to the map. "The vortex sites aren't just tourist traps. They align with geological anomalies, cavities, chambers, corridors beneath the surface, and they match the locations I saw in the vision. Every single one." She was building a map, not of tourist attractions, but of a buried infrastructure older than recorded history. The visions returned with greater frequency now. They no longer waited for her to be alone or vulnerable. They came while she was working, eating, driving. She would be reviewing footage, and suddenly the screen would blur, replaced by something deeper, older, more real than the digital image in front of her. She saw the Anunnaki engineers again, their tall forms moving with precision through vast crystalline chambers. They calibrated the consciousness grid with movements that looked like ritual, but functioned like surgery, adjusting frequencies, realigning nodes, fine-tuning a system so complex it made modern technology look primitive. Human subjects entered the chambers, Atlantean hybrids, their features blended, their expressions serene, and lay down in cradles of light. As the grid activated, their awareness expanded, spreading across the planet like roots through soil. She could feel it, the synchronized thought, the collective consciousness, the terrifying beauty of minds linked without boundary. Karu's voice threaded through the vision, layered and certain. Atlantis was a network of consciousness, a living technology designed to elevate human awareness, but it was also a weapon. And the Anunnaki shut it down before humans could misuse it. Maya gasped and found herself back in the motel room, her hand gripping the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. She wrote it down immediately, capturing every detail before it faded. The visions were no longer disruptions. They were data. She wasn't alone in her investigation for long. Jenna was a local tour guide, mid-30s, with sun-bleached hair and the kind of practiced enthusiasm that came from years of performing for tourists. Maya had filmed her during the early phase of the documentary, catching her in the act of staging a vortex experience. Carefully timed pauses, strategic silences, just enough mysticism to justify the fee. But when Maya approached her again, this time off-camera, Jenna's performance dropped. They met at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Jenna stirred her latte absently, staring at the foam. "I know what you think of me," she said. "Fraud, charlatan. I've heard it before." "I'm not here to judge," Maya replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Jenna looked up. "I do stage some of it. The tourists want a show, and I give them one. But the real phenomena, those are undeniable. I've seen things I can't explain. Lights that move with intention. Equipment that fails in patterns. People who come here skeptical and leave changed. And I've seen people who don't want those things explained." "Who?" "Government types, contractors, researchers who show up, take measurements, and disappear. This place is being monitored, Maya, has been for decades." Jenna became an unlikely ally. She knew the tourist industry's lies, but she also knew the truth underneath. She introduced Maya to locals who had witnessed anomalies, shared stories that never made it into official reports, and helped her navigate the cultural sensitivities of filming near sacred indigenous sites. 2 days later, Maya received an anonymous email. The subject line was blank. The body contained a single sentence. "You're asking the right questions. Here's what they don't want you to see." Attached were encrypted files, dozens of them. Maya spent an entire night decrypting and reviewing the data. Government seismic surveys dating back to the 1970s, electromagnetic readings from military installations, classified memos discussing subsurface anomalies of unknown origin beneath Sedona. The data confirmed it. The government had been tracking the grid for decades. They knew what was down there. The sender identified himself only as a disillusioned agent who wants the truth out. Maya backed up the files to 3 separate drives and buried them in hidden folders. She didn't know if the sender was genuine or if this was a trap. But the data was too detailed, too technical to be fabricated. She was no longer invisible, and she was no longer just an observer. She arranged a video call with her editor, a woman named Claire, who had worked with her on every project for the past 6 years. Claire appeared on screen, looking concerned. "Maya, you look like hell." "Thanks. I'm serious. What's going on?" Maya pulled up footage on her second monitor, clips of the craft, the visions, the interviews with the Elder and Dr. Chen, the leaked government data. She walked Claire through it all, her voice clinical, methodical, like she was presenting evidence in court. Claire was silent for a long time. "If you release this," she finally said, "you'll be discredited, or worse." "I know." "Then why?" "Because it's real, Claire. I've spent a decade debunking frauds, and I know the difference. This isn't a hoax. This isn't hysteria. Something is buried beneath this desert, and people have been covering it up for decades." Jenna, sitting beside Maya during the call, leaned into frame. "We frame it carefully. We let the evidence speak. We don't make claims we can't support, but we present what we've found and let the audience decide." Claire rubbed her face. "You're no longer just documenting the story. You're becoming part of it." "I know," Maya said quietly. The confrontation came 3 days later. Maya was sitting alone in a diner, reviewing notes over breakfast, when 2 men in dark suits slid into the booth across from her. They didn't ask permission. They didn't introduce themselves. One of them, older, grey-haired, with the kind of calm that suggested authority, spoke first. "You're filming in a sensitive area," he said. "We recommend you wrap up your project and leave Sedona." Maya set down her coffee. "And if I don't? Then we'll have to take additional measures to ensure the security of ongoing operations." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The kind delivered by people who had legal authority and no intention of negotiating. "What operations?" Maya asked. The man smiled thinly. "Have a safe trip home, Ms. Rhodes." They stood and left without another word. She was no longer invisible. Someone wanted her gone. That evening, Maya returned to the Vortex site, where she'd first encountered the craft. She needed B-roll, But more than that, she needed to test a hypothesis. If the grid was reactive, if her investigation was somehow accelerating its reactivation, then proximity to the nodes should produce measurable effects. She was right. Halfway through filming, the sky darkened unnaturally. A storm rolled in with impossible speed, clouds forming from nothing, the air crackling with static. Her equipment began to malfunction, the camera desynced, the audio recorded interference that sounded like voices, her compass spun wildly, the needle refusing to settle. And then the vision hit. She dropped to her knees, gasping. This time it was more intense, more invasive. She saw the grid beneath her feet, a lattice of light pulsing with energy, nodes flaring one by one as they woke from dormancy. And she understood with terrible clarity. By seeking the grid, she was waking it up. Her investigation wasn't passive documentation, it was activation. She realized the terrible truth. By seeking the grid, she was waking it up. When the vision released her, she was alone in the desert, the storm dissipating as quickly as it had formed. Her hands were shaking. Her mind was racing. She packed her equipment in silence and drove back to the motel, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and determination. The next morning, the Hopi elder called her. "Come to the site tonight," he said. "There is something you need to see." She arrived at dusk. Thomas Yazzie was waiting at a remote location marked by ancient petroglyphs, spirals, geometric patterns, figures that looked unsettlingly like the Anunnaki from her visions. A small fire burned in a pit. He gestured for her to sit. "This is a private ceremony," he said. "No cameras." Maya nodded and left her equipment in the car. Thomas performed a ritual she didn't understand, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression that was both sad and knowing. "You were chosen because you do not believe," he said. "The grid needs a skeptic. A believer would weaponize it. A skeptic might protect it." Maya stared at the fire. "I don't want to protect it. I just want to understand it." Understanding and protection are the same thing. The grid is not a machine. It is a living system, and it responds to intention. If you continue this investigation with the wrong motive, fame, proof, revenge, it will corrupt you. But if you seek the truth to guard it, to prevent misuse, then you might survive what's coming. What's coming? Thomas looked toward the horizon, where the last light was fading. Reactivation. The grid is waking and others will come, some to control it, some to destroy it. You will have to choose which side you're on. The elder saw her not as a filmmaker, but as a guardian. She wasn't sure she wanted the role. But as she drove back through the dark desert, her mind replaying the elder's words and the visions and the government warnings, she realized the choice had already been made. She was no longer documenting a story. She was living it, and there was no turning back. The coordinates led her to a restricted canyon, marked on maps with warnings about unstable terrain and private property. Maya went anyway. She hiked deep into the red rock wilderness, following the GPS points extracted from her visions and cross-referenced with the leaked government data. The landscape grew more desolate with each mile, twisted junipers clinging to stone, the air thick with silence, the kind that feels like expectation. She found the entrance just before dusk, a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a person to slip through, concealed by centuries of erosion and deliberate camouflage. She had walked past it twice before noticing the geometric precision in the surrounding rock formations, too regular to be natural. Maya squeezed through the opening, her camera bag scraping against stone. The passage opened into an underground chamber that took her breath away. Crystalline formations lined the walls, growing in impossible patterns, faceted, luminous, humming with a low-frequency vibration that she felt in her bones before she heard it. The air smelled mineral-rich and ancient, like stone that had never seen sunlight. Light refracted through the crystals in colors that didn't belong in nature, shifting between violet and gold and something she couldn't name. This was it, the heart of the grid. the proof she needed. She set up her camera with trembling hands, framing the shot, checking the exposure. The crystals pulsed gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat rendered in light. She began filming, narrating in a whisper. "I'm approximately 30 meters below ground level. The chamber is lined with crystalline structures, exhibiting organized geometric patterns consistent with..." The surge hit without warning. Maya collapsed, her body folding as if the strings holding her upright had been cut. The camera fell from her hands but kept recording, the lens capturing her convulsion, the way her back arched, her hands clawed at nothing. She was no longer in the chamber. She was inside the memory. She was Atlantean. The vision was total, immersive, inescapable. She experienced it not as an observer, but as a participant. Her consciousness pulled back through time and merged with a collective awareness that spanned thousands of minds. She felt herself lying in a cradle of light within a crystalline chamber, identical to the one beneath Sedona, but larger, grander, more complete. Around her, others lay in similar cradles, human Atlantean hybrids, their features blended, their expressions serene. The grid activated. She felt it like a wave of electricity passing through her nervous system, but it wasn't painful. It was rapture. Her awareness expanded beyond her body, stretching across the planet, connecting to every other mind in the network. She could feel their thoughts, their emotions, their memories as clearly as her own. There was no separation, no boundary between self and other. Time became non-linear. She experienced past, present, and future simultaneously, layered and fluid. She understood the grid's purpose with terrifying clarity. It was a consciousness network, a technology designed to elevate human awareness to a collective state, to bypass the limitations of individual perception and create something greater, a planetary mind, unified, boundless, transcendent. But she also felt the danger, the intoxication of power, the temptation to weaponize omniscience. The way some minds within the network began to dominate others, asserting control, twisting the collective into something hierarchical and cruel. The vision shifted. She was no longer in the cradle, but in a vast council chamber, witnessing the Anunnaki in debate. Their voices resonated in harmonics that bypassed language, speaking directly to understanding. She saw the factions forming, some arguing to preserve the grid, others insisting it must be shut down immediately before humanity destroyed itself with it. Karu stood at the center, their angular face illuminated by the lattice of light behind them. "We did not destroy Atlantis," Karu said, their voice layered with certainty and sorrow. "We hid it, so that one day, when your species was ready, it could rise again, not as a weapon but as a bridge." The decision was made. The grid was deactivated, its nodes buried beneath stone and ocean, its coordinates seeded into myth and prophecy, preserved in oral traditions and sacred sites, waiting for a future humanity that might be wise enough to use it properly. Maya gasped and woke in the chamber, her body soaked with sweat, her mind reeling. The crystals around her still pulsed, but quieter now, as if satisfied. She looked around wildly, disoriented, and saw her camera, miraculously, impossibly, still recording. She crawled to it, her hands shaking, and reviewed the footage. The crystals had emitted light patterns during her collapse, intricate sequences that looked like data, like language. She filmed the walls from multiple angles, sketching frantically in her notebook, downloading coordinates from the fragmented memory still echoing in her mind. She drew the lattice, a complete map of nodes spanning the American Southwest, from Sedona to Chaco Canyon to the Four Corners and beyond. She had everything, the locations, the history, the proof. She could expose it all. As she climbed back through the fissure and emerged into the night, she felt triumphant. She had crossed the threshold into something beyond journalism, beyond documentation. She had touched the grid, survived it, and returned with evidence. But as she reached her SUV, the first signs of consequences appeared. The sky above Sedona had changed. The stars were visible, but between them faint auroral lights danced, green and violet ribbons that shouldn't exist at this latitude. Her compass spun uselessly. Her phone's GPS glitched, showing her location flickering between Sedona and coordinates in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. She didn't just find the grid, she activated it. And now everyone was paying attention. The drive back to the motel was surreal. Animals crossed the road in confused clusters, deer, coyotes, even a bear, all moving in the same direction, as if following an invisible signal. Power lines hummed louder than usual. Streetlights flickered in synchronized patterns. When Maya checked local news on her laptop, the reports confirmed her fears. Compasses failing across the region, wildlife behaving strangely, unexplained lights over Sedona. Scientists from the university had recorded a measurable spike in geomagnetic activity centered on the vortex sites. Tourists were posting videos online, speculating about solar flares, military tests, mass hallucinations. No one suspected the truth, except the people who had been monitoring the grid for decades. Maya spent the next 18 hours editing. She worked with manic focus, assembling the footage into a rough cut that told the story from beginning to end. Her initial skepticism, the first encounter, the elders' testimony, Dr. Chen's data, the leaked government files, the chamber, the vision. She had interviews, visuals, her own testimony, and now measurable proof that something had changed. She sent a preview to Claire, her editor. She sent another copy to a journalist she trusted, someone who had covered classified programs and government cover-ups. She uploaded encrypted backups to 3 separate cloud servers. For one night, she believed she had succeeded. She had the story of a lifetime. She had the truth. She sat in her motel room, exhausted but exhilarated, watching the rough cut on her laptop screen. It was raw, imperfect, but it was real. She had done it. She had documented the impossible and survived. And then the walls began to close in. The first sign was the helicopter, a black, unmarked aircraft circling her motel at low altitude, the rotor wash rattling windows, the searchlight sweeping across the parking lot. Maya watched from behind her curtain, her pulse accelerating. Then her internet connection died. Not slow, not interrupted, completely severed, as if someone had cut the line at the source. Her phone screen flashed once, then went black. When it powered back on, every file was gone. Contacts, messages, photos, apps, all wiped remotely, replaced by a factory reset screen. She grabbed her laptop, but it was already too late. A message appeared on the screen, text only, white letters on black background. "They know. Get out. Now." It was from the disillusioned agent, the one who had sent her the encrypted files. The message stayed on screen for 3 seconds, then her laptop shut down and refused to restart. The false victory shattered. She had crossed a line, and the people who had been watching for decades were closing in. Maya moved on instinct. She grabbed the hard drives from her bag, 3 backups stored in separate cases, and shoved them into her jacket pockets. She left the laptop, the camera, everything that could be tracked or remotely accessed. She walked out of the motel room into the parking lot, her breath visible in the cold desert night. The black SUV was there, parked 2 spaces from her rental. The driver's window was down. The man in sunglasses, the same one from days ago, watched her leave. She didn't run. Running would confirm guilt. Instead, she walked to her SUV, got in, and started the engine. Her hands were steady, but her mind was screaming. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the helicopter rose from its circling pattern and followed. The grid was awake. The film was incomplete, but dangerous. And Maya Rhodes, the skeptic who had spent a decade debunking frauds, was now the target of a cover-up older than she could comprehend. She drove into the desert night, pursued by forces she barely understood, carrying the most important story humanity had never been allowed to hear. Maya sat on the motel room floor, her laptop open in front of her, frantically clicking through folders. She navigated to the project file, the one she had titled The Grid Beneath, Real Story, and double-clicked. The loading icon spun, then stopped. An error message appeared. File corrupted, unable to open. Her hands went cold. She opened the external hard drive. Same message. She checked the second backup. Corrupted. The third drive, hidden in a separate bag, corrupted. She logged into her cloud storage accounts, her fingers trembling on the keyboard. Every file showed the same status: 0 bytes. Empty. Erased. The footage from the chamber. The crystalline walls pulsing with light, the patterns that looked like language, reduced to static. Her interview transcripts, scrambled into gibberish. The leaked government data, overwritten with random strings of characters. The notes she had taken during visions, corrupted beyond recovery. Years of work, gone, not stolen, erased. They didn't just surveil her, they erased her. The film, the proof, the years of work, gone. Maya let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She slammed the laptop shut and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to breathe through the panic tightening around her chest. How? How had they accessed everything simultaneously? Cloud servers in different countries, drives that had never been connected to the internet, encrypted files with military-grade protection, all of it wiped at the same time. Unless it wasn't just hackers, unless the grid itself had reacted. She grabbed a burner phone, one she'd purchased with cash 2 days ago, and called Claire. Her editor answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with fear. "Maya, what the hell did you send me? What do you mean? Your files infected my system. Everything, my computer fried. The hard drive melted, literally melted. Smoke, sparks, the whole building's fire alarm went off. What the hell did you send me?" Maya's throat went dry. "I sent you a video file, standard codec. It shouldn't." "Well, it did. And now I have investigators asking me questions about unauthorized access to classified networks. Me, Maya. I edit cooking shows and true crime. I don't touch classified anything. Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Don't contact me again." The line went dead. The line between human sabotage and grid interference blurred. She couldn't tell who or what was attacking her. Was it a government black ops team with advanced cyber warfare tools? Or had the grid itself, awakened by her investigation, reached through the network and destroyed anything connected to its exposure? Both possibilities were terrifying. Neither offered comfort. Exhaustion finally overtook her. Maya collapsed onto the motel bed without undressing, her mind spinning with fragmented thoughts, paranoid calculations, the crushing weight of loss. Sleep came like a predator, dragging her under before she could resist, but her dreams were no longer visions. They were warnings. She found herself standing in the crystalline chamber again, but it was different. The walls were cracked, leaking some kind of dark fluid that pooled on the ground. The light pulsed erratically, like a failing heartbeat, and Karu was there, but distorted, fragmented, their form glitching like corrupted footage. "You have opened the door," Karu said, their voice layered with static and something that sounded like grief. "Disclosure will ignite a war. Consciousness cannot be controlled. It can only be weaponized or freed. I was trying to free it," Maya said, her voice echoing strangely in the dream space. "I wanted people to know the truth. Truth is not neutral. Truth is a weapon in the hands of those who fear it. Your species will not unite around the grid. They will fight for dominance over it, and in fighting they will destroy what remains." "Then what was I supposed to do? Ignore it? Pretend I didn't see?" Karu's form flickered, their face splitting into multiple overlapping images. "You were chosen because you do not believe, but belief is not the problem. The problem is what you do with knowledge. You sought proof. Proof demands reaction. Reaction demands conflict. Maya woke gasping, tangled in damp sheets, her heart pounding. The motel room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside flickering through the curtains. She sat up, trying to shake the dream, but it clung to her like oil. Even Karu, her guide, now felt like a threat. Was he helping her or using her? Had she been a messenger or a pawn in something far larger and more dangerous than she could comprehend? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Turn on the news." She grabbed the remote and powered on the television. Every channel was covering the same story. Mass synchronicities were being reported across the globe. Thousands of people in different countries experiencing identical dreams on the same night. Visions of crystalline cities, towering figures, lattices of light. UFO sightings had spiked. Pilots were reporting navigation failures. Hospitals were admitting patients complaining of collective consciousness experiences, describing the sensation of their thoughts merging with strangers. Scientists were baffled. Skeptics were scrambling for explanations. Believers were declaring it the beginning of a new age. And Maya wondered, with a sickening twist in her gut, if activating the node had already changed humanity's trajectory. What if exposing the grid doesn't free humanity? What if it destroys it? The next morning she received a call from the hospital. Jenna had been in an accident. Maya drove there in numb silence, her mind replaying worst-case scenarios. She found Jenna in a private room, her face bruised, her arm in a cast, her eyes hollow with shock. "What happened?" Maya asked, sitting beside the bed. Jenna's voice was barely a whisper. "They came to my house. 2 men. They asked about you. What you were filming, where you were staying, what you had told me." She swallowed hard, wincing. "I didn't tell them anything. But they knew. They knew about the chamber, the coordinates, everything. Jenna, I'm so sorry. They said it was a warning, that accidents happen to people who ask too many questions." Jenna looked at her, tears forming. "I was driving home, and my brakes failed. Just failed. I went off the road, hit a tree. The cop said it was mechanical failure, but Maya, I just had my car serviced. There was nothing wrong with it." Maya felt the guilt settle into her chest like a stone. Jenna was hurt because of her. The cost was no longer abstract. It wasn't just data and footage. It was people. Real people who had helped her, trusted her, and were now paying for her investigation with their safety. "I need you to stop," Jenna said, her voice breaking. "Please, just stop. Leave Sedona. Forget about the grid. I can't do this anymore." Maya left the hospital feeling hollowed out. She sat in her SUV in the parking lot, staring at nothing, replaying Jenna's words. She asked herself the question she had been avoiding since the beginning. What if exposing the grid doesn't free humanity? What if it destroys it? The vision came without warning, pulling her under before she could brace for it. She saw the near future, not a possibility but a trajectory. Global powers reverse engineering the grid technology. Military installations weaponizing consciousness. Soldiers trained to infiltrate enemy minds, to control thoughts, to break wills from a distance. Psychic warfare erupting between nations. Populations controlled through the lattice, their awareness hijacked, their autonomy stripped away. The grid, designed to elevate humanity, twisted into a tool of oppression. Atlantis rising, not as a paradise, but as a prison. Karu's voice threaded through the vision, cold and certain. "Your species is not ready. You will turn transcendence into tyranny. We shut down the grid to prevent this, and you have awakened it." Maya gasped and found herself back in the parking lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her body shaking. The worst-case scenario wasn't hypothetical, it was inevitable, and she had set it in motion. Her phone buzzed. A message from the disillusioned agent, the one who had leaked the government data. "They know my identity. I'm going dark. You're on your own. Destroy everything." Maya stared at the message. She typed a reply. "What do you mean? What's happening?" The response came immediately. User not found. He was gone. Vanished. Either into hiding or into something worse. She had lost everything, her film, her safety, her allies, and possibly her sanity. The proof was destroyed. The people who had helped her were hurt or disappeared. The grid was awake, and she had no way to stop what was coming, no way to undo what she had done. Maya sat alone in her SUV, the hospital looming behind her, the desert stretching endlessly ahead, and felt the weight of the all-is-lost moment settle over her like a shroud. She had sought the truth. She had found it. And now she understood that some truths are not meant to be uncovered, not because they are false, but because humanity is not ready for the consequences of knowing them. The question that haunted her, the one she couldn't answer, was simple and devastating. What do you do when the truth you fought for becomes the weapon that destroys everything you were trying to protect? Maya drove into the desert at night, away from the motel, away from the surveillance, away from anything that could track or monitor or erase her. The highway stretched out empty and dark, illuminated only by her headlights cutting through the void. She turned onto a dirt road that led nowhere, drove until the lights of Sedona disappeared behind the red rock formations, and stopped. The silence was absolute. She got out of the SUV, grabbed her battered laptop, the one that still had fragments of corrupted footage, and sat on the hood, staring up at the stars. The desert night was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through clothing and settles into bones. But she barely felt it. Her mind was too loud. She replayed the fragments. Glitchy clips of the crystalline chamber, audio distortions that sounded like Karu's voice. Sketches she'd made during visions. Everything was broken, incomplete, but the pieces still held traces of what she had witnessed. She had spent her career debunking myths. Now she was the myth. And she didn't know if that made her a prophet or a cautionary tale. The question that gnawed at her wasn't whether the story was real. She knew it was. She had felt it, seen it, touched it. The question was whether telling it would save humanity or destroy it. Whether disclosure was an act of liberation or an act of violence. She thought about Jenna, bruised and broken in the hospital bed. She thought about the disillusioned agent, vanished into the void. She thought about Claire, her editor, terrified and cutting ties. She thought about the global synchronicities, the mass visions, the grid waking up beneath the earth. Every action had consequences, and she was responsible for all of them. The epiphany came slowly, not as a sudden flash, but as a gradual realization that assembled itself from the fragments of her experience. She pieced together the understanding like reconstructing a shattered mosaic. The grid itself was neutral. It was a tool, a technology, a system. It had no morality. It didn't care who used it or how. It was humanity that determined its purpose. The truth doesn't set you free. It gives you a choice. And she had to decide whether humanity deserved that choice or needed to be protected from it. She opened her laptop and began to work. The footage was corrupted, but her memory wasn't. The visions had burned themselves into her consciousness with a clarity that rivaled the original recordings. She could recall every detail. The crystalline walls pulsing with light, the Anunnaki figures calibrating the lattice, the sensation of merging with the Atlantean network, the council's debate, Karu's warnings. She began to reconstruct the film from embodied memory and fragments. She wrote narration from scratch, using her own voice, her own experience, no longer pretending to be objective. She imported the few uncorrupted clips, interview fragments, B-roll of the desert, her own testimony filmed before the data wipe. She sketched diagrams from memory, mapping the grid's nodes across the southwest. But this time, she narrated it differently. Not as objective journalism, but as a transmission. A story told not to prove, but to offer. A choice extended to the viewer. Believe or don't, but understand the stakes. She couldn't prove it anymore. But she could tell it, And in the telling, she could offer a choice. The work consumed her. She spent 3 days in a rented cabin off the grid, powered by a generator, disconnected from the internet, using only local files and air-gapped drives. She ate sporadically, slept in fragments, driven by a compulsion that felt both like purpose and possession. On the 3rd night, the final vision came. She was editing a sequence when the screen flickered and Karu appeared, not in the footage, but standing in the cabin with her, as real as anything she had ever seen. Their form was solid, angular, impossibly tall, their face carved from geometry and light. "You have the blueprint," Karu said, their voice resonating in harmonics that bypassed sound. "You have the story. Will you broadcast it, knowing it will ignite war? Or will you bury it, knowing humanity may never evolve?" Maya stood, her heart pounding. "You said I was chosen because I don't believe, because a skeptic might protect the grid. But now you're asking me to choose between chaos and silence." "I am not asking. I am observing. The choice is yours. It always was. Then why show me any of this? Why give me the visions, the coordinates, the truth? If the choice is mine, why burden me with it?" Karu's form flickered, their expression unreadable. "Because someone had to be burdened, and you were the one willing to look." "That's not an answer." "It is the only answer. We do not guide, we test, and you must pass this test alone." Karu vanished, leaving Maya standing in the cabin, trembling, the laptop still glowing behind her. Karu wasn't a guide. He was a test, and she had to pass it alone. She sat back down, her mind racing, and made a decision. She would create 3 versions of the film, 3 paths, 3 possible futures. She worked through the night, duplicating the project file and editing each version with surgical precision. The first version, full disclosure, every detail, the chamber footage, the visions, the leaked government data, the coordinates of every node in the grid, the names of agencies involved in the cover-up, the complete blueprint for reactivating the Atlantean consciousness network. This version held nothing back. It was a declaration of war against secrecy, an invitation to global chaos, and a gamble that humanity could handle the truth. The second version, mythologized. She framed the story as speculative, blending documentary with narrative, presenting the grid as a possibility rather than a certainty. She included the testimonies, the anomalies, the elders' warnings, but positioned them as myth, legend, a story humanity could choose to explore or dismiss. This version planted seeds without demanding immediate action. It was a slow disclosure, a breadcrumb trail for those ready to follow. The third version, Suppression Protocol. A film that documented her investigation but concluded with her own breakdown. A skeptic who crossed the line, succumbed to delusion, and fabricated evidence to validate her visions. This version buried the truth beneath a narrative of mental collapse. It protected the grid by discrediting the story, ensuring no one would take it seriously. She burned each version onto a separate USB drive and labeled them clearly: full disclosure, mythologized version, suppression protocol. Then she set up her camera and filmed herself, explaining the stakes of each choice. 3 paths, she said, her voice steady but her eyes hollowed by exhaustion. 1 ignites chaos, 1 plants seeds, 1 buries the truth forever. I have hours to decide which one to release. She had to choose which version of the future to risk. She contacted a rogue independent platform, one known for hosting whistleblowers, activists and journalists blacklisted by mainstream media. She arranged a live-streamed premiere, scheduled for the following night. The event was publicized as the Sedona documentary Final Cut. Within hours, thousands registered to watch. The platform's servers prepared for the load. Maya knew agencies were monitoring. She knew this was her last chance. Once the film went live, there would be no taking it back, no revisions, no second attempts. She was gambling with the future, and she had to choose which version of the future to risk. The hours before the premiere stretched like a nightmare. She sat in the cabin, staring at the 3 USB drives laid out on the table, each one a different timeline. Her hand hovered over them, unable to commit. Full disclosure would expose everything, but it might trigger the arms race Karu had warned her about. Governments would scramble to control the grid. Wars would be fought over consciousness itself. Mythologized would preserve the story without forcing immediate action, but it might be dismissed as fiction, the truth lost in layers of ambiguity. Suppression protocol would protect humanity from its own immaturity, but it would also condemn them to ignorance, ensuring the grid remained buried, dormant, forgotten. Maya closed her eyes and thought about Jenna, about the elder, about the disillusioned agent, about every person who had helped her, hurt because of her, or disappeared into the machinery of secrecy. And she made her choice. The camera blinked to life, its little red light pulsing in the dimness of the hideout, illuminating Maya's angular face and the 3 USB drives laid out before her. The room was bare, every surface empty, but for blunt necessities. The battered laptop, the microphone, the isolated router already running on scrambled proxies, the clock's red digits marking minutes until the stream began. The only noise came from the low hum of the server fan and Maya's steady, controlled breaths. Beyond these walls, agencies monitored frequencies, scripts refreshed search spiders, and thousands of strangers waited, eyes fixed on screens, hearts hungry for a revelation they were not sure they believed was possible. No time left for rehearsal, no time left for fear. Maya looked into the lens, let the weight of the world settle in the hollows beneath her eyes, and spoke. If you're watching this, you are watching what no one was ever meant to see. Not the grid, not Atlantis, and certainly not the mind of the skeptic who chased both until she couldn't tell memory from madness. The chat, filled with questions, emojis, accusations, calls for government transparency, warnings to disconnect. The signal was being traced. She knew it. The lag was growing, the server's heat blooming against her knees. She steadied her hand and picked up the drives. This is not about proof. It's not about belief. Not anymore. She turned each USB over between her fingers, labeling them aloud for the audience, as if confessing to the world itself. Full disclosure. Mythologized version. Suppression protocol. She watched herself on the small preview window, eyes shadow-ringed and hollow, then inserted the drive marked mythologized version. As the file loaded and the feed split to the documentary, Maya drifted in and out of the image, now the silent watcher behind her own narration, a voice that rang with exhaustion, awe, and a fierce reluctance. The screen pulsed with the familiar, now infamous montage, the vortexes, the chamber, fragments of the Atlantean vision reassembled through sketches, the Hopi elder's warnings layered with interview cuts, Jenna's face nervous on the outskirts of a ceremony. None of the coordinates appeared in full. No close-ups of blueprints, no sequences mapping the nodes in dangerous clarity. The history was there, the myth alive, but the weaponizable specifics and secrets were fogged by metaphor and distance. The chat exploded anew. Some raged at her for holding back, wanted names, wanted locations, wanted the playbook. Others marveled, wept, cursed her as a false prophet or an agent of chaos. The feed skipped frames as bots attacked, as authorities raised digital walls. Maya's voice pierced the tumult. The grid is real, but its power is not a gift. It is a mirror. If you seek it, ask yourself what you plan to do with what you find. She chose the middle path. She gave humanity the story, but not the weapon. She planted the seed, but did not ignite the war. As the final segment played, Maya heard the rumble of engines outside, the floodlights painting shadows through the broken blinds, black SUVs, the swirl of blue vests, the staccato bark of radios on closed frequencies. She kept narrating, controlled, recounting her own transformation, her doubts. We all want meaning, but meaning comes with a price. Who pays and who profits? is the question myth can never answer. She pressed upload all segments. The progress bar crawled. The sirens drew closer. Within minutes, the stream snapped to static. The final scene cut by brute force as the door buckled, feet thundered up the stairs, and Maya, lips parted as if to say one last thing, reached across the keyboard and locked the archive with a code she would never reveal. For a moment, the world was left with only silence, the afterimage of a woman who might have been prophet, prisoner, or trickster. In the hours and days that followed, Maya's documentary erupted across the global conversation. TikToks dissected frames, news panels debated her sanity, forums mapped every shot, desperate for hidden meanings, missed clues. For each who denounced the film as hoax or clickbait, another declared it prophecy, citing the uptick in synchronicities, the dreams of strangers echoing her visions, the rash of unexplained electromagnetic storms rolling through Sedona and far from it. Scientists demanded investigations. Governments denied everything. The grid remained veiled, the specifics lost, but the question had become viral. No one could take the world back to the state it was before the broadcast. Maya survived, as far as anyone could. 6 months later, beneath a pseudonym, in a cabin nearly buried in snow, she lived out a shadow life, watching from afar as rumors flourished and faded. On her battered laptop, she traced global anomalies, bursts of entangled consciousness events, wild data spikes on obscure scientific networks, patterns in wildlife and in the stock market. The blueprint, encoded through math and myth, lay hidden, locked away in the substrate of the grid itself. She alone held the key and would give it to no one, at least not in this lifetime. Cameras off, internet dark, Maya walked the perimeter at dusk and sometimes felt the lattice bruise the soles of her feet, that faint hum in the earth that was not rock, not wind, but memory preserved in crystal. She heard whispers in her sleep, sometimes warnings, sometimes the gentle provocation of a question she had lived too vividly to ever answer. One night, as snow fell silently over the world, she saw Karu a final time, not in footage, not in mind, but as a presence illuminated by her own fear and hope. He nodded. Was it approval, resignation, simple acknowledgement, and then faded into light, the grid quiet once again, patient as stone. Maya never knew if she made the right choice. Power and myth are two sides of the same coin, and in choosing to tell the story but keep the weapon hidden, she was both gatekeeper and mythmaker. She became neither prophet nor villain, only what she had always been, a skeptic forced by the immensity of the unanswered to hold the question for as long as she could. And so, the documentary loops, the corrupted opening, the remixed footage, the static and blur, carrying its secret in the open like a beacon or a bluff. The audience now knows it was the mythologized version, the decoy, a message informed by truth, forever dancing on the razor's edge between revelation and concealment. The real film, the real map, the real danger, was buried with Maya, stored where only a different future might find it. The closing image is a map of modern Sedona, overlaid with a lattice of light that might be a digital artifact, or a warning, or a question the viewer cannot help but ask. The camera lingers, inviting uncertainty, then darkness, the last words on screen. How much of your reality is already shaped by grids you cannot see? There is no answer after that. Only silence, the promise of myth, and the knowledge that sometimes the bravest act is to leave the choice and the risk open for those who come after.